All right. Yes. This is a much more luxurious situation. Okay, so some of you voted in the email that I sent out of what you would like to see. And what you want to see has to do with developing your core identity and story angle for your online presence, your online character, attractive character. So we talked about what it means to have an attractive character in the webinar on Friday. Basically what it means is that you adopt a kind of persona, okay? So you adopt a kind of persona. It's not fake. It's not untrue. It's not inauthentic to who you are. It's just a way of structuring the way you present yourself, the way that you construct the narrative around your story and why anybody should care about you, why they should listen to you if you have a product, why they should buy anything from you, right? So in developing an attractive character, and basically it's a good place to start because this is really what's going to dictate how you market yourself on the whole, right? So you want to think about, there's really 3 steps to developing it. So the first step is to determine the core identity of your character. So in the webinar, we talked about 3 core identities. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means. Today. We're going to talk also about story angle. In addition to that, the third step is really getting into 4 story elements that make your story like really just knock it out of the water and make it appeal to soul clients. I don't know if we're going to get to that in the time that we have together today, but if we don't get to it, we will follow up in a second segment. So first, oftentimes the missing link in any marketing strategy is this attractive character. So a lot of people just throw their credentials up on their website and they expect that to be like something that clients are drawn to, or they expect clients to fill that out themselves, like to flesh out what is the story between these credentials. Now, you want to think, really, first you want to think about how attractive is my character as it stands right now to my clients, right? And if you're struggling with attracting soul clients, it may be that your persona, your online image, isn't quite what it needs to be in order to attract whom you want to attract, okay? Sometimes another thing I notice people do is they think that they do kind of like a catch-all, like I just want clients, so I'm going to make myself I'm going to make my specialties as broad as humanly possible. And I don't recommend that. I recommend that if you know there's a specific population that you want to work with, that be specific in that, okay? So now you might also think, well, whatever the character type is, I don't have that much of an interesting story. And I would argue you probably do. It just depends on the secret of your delivery, right? How are you delivering that message? And that's when we get into story angle. Okay, so let's just dive right in. So in developing your attractive character, you want to start with the core identity, and we're going to talk about the leader first. So, and there's first I want to say there's a ton of archetypal characters that you could use to sort of present yourself. Actually, now that I have you here, I do have this book. This is a really good book to get. It's called A Writer's Guide to Characterization, Archetypes, Heroic Journeys, and Other Elements of Dynamic Character Development. She actually goes through and she assigns spirit animals to characterization. So for all of you healers out there, or all of you really deeply spiritual individuals, like here she's got like the wolf, right? So I have a video on this feed that talks about the lone wolf as being a characterization, right, of someone in private practice, for example. I've got some other books too. I'll drip recommendations in the feed. But anyway, there are 3 that I chose, and because I feel like they're particularly good for marketing. So the first one is the leader, the second one is the adventurer or the crusader, and the third one is the reluctant hero. So with the leader, the identity is really usually assumed by people whose goal it is to lead their audiences, in this case your ideal clients, from one place to another, okay? So most leaders have a similar backstory to that of their followers. Okay, and they're familiar with the hurdles and the pitfalls of their clients. Okay, so this is sort of like someone who becomes an addiction counselor because they struggled with addiction themselves. Okay, that would be the leader archetype would actually be a good one for you. Or it could be someone who's experienced sexual trauma in their life, and so now they want to work with sex abuse survivors. Okay. And that's not uncommon. And so because if you have a personal relationship to that, the leader archetype might be a good one for you. So, or like, let's say that's not the case for you, but you like the idea of the leader archetype. So I would say look at leaders you follow, right? Because just look at your Facebook news feed, right? Like what pages do you belong to? What shows do you watch? You know, who do you admire? What popular characters in the media do you admire? Why? What historical characters do you admire? Why? Right? And that could be a place to start. So the leader, how can we shorten this? So the leader leads. Let's say leads followers down the same path. Okay, so this is kind of like, so the leader follows their follower or leads their followers down the same path. So my story, if you attended my webinar, we talked a little bit about this. So in my professional online identity, I assume a leader archetype. And the program that I'm offering is called the Abundant Healer 90 Days to Your Career Success. And so what I do is I tell you about how I achieved success, and now I want to show you how to do it the way that I did it. So I'm asking you to follow me down the same path because I believe that you'll get similar results. Okay. So next we have the adventurer and the crusader. So the adventurer and the crusader is kind of similar to the leader, but the difference is that the adventurer and the crusader, they tend to be a little more curious. They act less like they have all the answers. And they've most likely already gone on a journey to bring back what they've discovered to you. Okay, so they're more likely to, let's say, bring the answers back. So maybe that's a good way to say it. So we'll say brings the answers back. So the adventurer, the crusader, brings the answers back to you. This one's particularly good with a story angle of discovery, and we'll talk more about that when we get into discovery. But basically, like if you have a specialization or a technique that you use that you think is really effective, techniques really, they're really good fit with the adventurer crusader, right? Like, oh, I went through XYZ, and then I discovered this, and then this thing really changed my life, and now I'm going to share this thing with you, as opposed to I'm going to show you the way so you can figure it out for yourself. It's a little bit different. So here's how I figured it out. I want to show you how to figure it out for yourself. And this is, I figured it out. This is the answer. Let me give you the answer so you can benefit from it. So it's a little bit different, okay? Then we have the reluctant hero. So the reluctant hero, this archetype is a little bit more like humble, right? Like this kind of character doesn't like the spotlight, feels kind of awkward in the spotlight, doesn't really want a lot of attention, but they really believe in their knowledge and expertise, and they feel like it's almost a moral or principled obligation for them to share it with people. Okay, so let's say shy, but morally obligated to share. So I'm trying to think of a good example of a reluctant hero. I mean, I guess I'll just think of a pop example. You know Bob Dylan? He hated being on stage. He'd wear those hats and glasses and things to avoid being seen on stage, even though he's smack dab in the middle of it. That's kind of a reluctant hero. And yet, you know, people loved that about him. That was part of his shtick, right? So Bob Dylan's a good example of that. If we were to think about this in terms of like psychotherapists, I went to a conference, the Low Country Mental Health Conference this year, and I saw Dr. Mate speak. He wrote a book called Scattered, and he wrote another book called The Hungry Ghost. He writes a lot about addiction and ADHD. And he's a total reluctant hero persona. Very kind of, you know, soft-spoken, deep, kind of grumbly, gravelly voice, kind of skinny, like walks across the stage, not very showy, but still engaging. You know, still engaging. You find yourself kind of leaning forward to hear what he has to say. His head's kind of down a lot when he talks. That's kind of reluctant hero stuff. But it's almost like the reluctant hero creates this sort of persona where you're like, what is he saying? It's gold. It's pure gold. I need to hear it. I need to hear it. Okay, so that's kind of a reluctant hero. I find a lot of therapists prefer this one because they have some hangups about being too showy. They don't like to be salesy or whatever, or they don't want to assume a leadership role because that feels like too much responsibility. Okay, so if this feels more like a comfortable fit for our therapists out there, embrace it, right? Play the part, take it on. That's a great one to have. So now, if you got, I can move on. I want to talk about story angle. So, okay, so we've got core identity down, right? We have a general sense of the underlying character structure, the goals, the motivations, right? So the leader is motivated to show you how to do things for yourself. The crusader adventurer is motivated to give you solutions to your problems. And the reluctant hero is motivated by a moral obligation to share the knowledge that he has, okay? And so if we understand those motivations and those goals, then that kind of gives us a window into how those things are delivered, right? So let's talk now about story angle, because that's a little bit more about the how it's delivered. So story angle. You know, I have to tell you, I'm one of those, every time I spell angle, I want to spell it angel. And right now I just had to double check and make sure I didn't do that. Okay, so there's a couple different story angles. I'm going to go through 4. There's more than that, but I'm just going to do 4 because I think in terms as being therapists and healers, these are probably the most relevant. So the first one is loss and redemption. Okay, so if you saw my webinar on Friday, I have a loss and redemption story. So it kind of goes like this. I had everything. I was on top of the world. It was great. But then something happened. I had to figure my way out of whatever that situation was. But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise because I went through whatever you went through, and I learned and or received something really significant, like some kind of insight, right? And now I basically want to show you how to do this for yourself, right? So that's in a nutshell the loss and redemption story. And you can see how well that goes with a leader archetype. So again, I had everything. I was on top of the world. It was great, but then something happened. I had to figure my way out of that thing, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise because I went through, what did you go through? And I learned and or received, what did you get? And now I basically want to show you how to do that too. So that's like the loss and redemption story in a nutshell. And they're really powerful because they show the upside of going through hardships or meeting certain challenges. But the trick is revealing just enough to make a connection with your soul client without revealing too much that you feel overexposed and they feel triggered, right? That there's a level of self-disclosure which is really endearing. And then there's a level where it just goes beyond and you're just like, whoa, that's not my deal. This person doesn't know how to hold their boundaries. So it's a bit of a fine art, right? You want to determine how much of this is applicable, like how much of it's sort of riding a line between personal and the archetypal, right? So this is as much my personal story as it is an archetypal story or journey that more than, that anybody could relate to. So that's the loss and redemption. So let's say having it all, losing it. Let's say leap of faith, and then getting it back. So that is a loss and redemption story in a nutshell. So if this is one that resonates with you, what did you have? How did you lose it? What leap of faith did you take? And how did that help you get it all back? Okay, so that's your loss and redemption story. Next, we have a before and after story. These ones are pretty basic. Before and after. Before and after story, in a nutshell. First, I was, what were you? Then I tried, what did you try? Now I'm, what are you now, right? So this is a very concise story of transformation, and they're pretty easy to write. So for example, my YouTube channel and a lot of my online presence and marketing is based on my knowledge of attachment theory and on energetic healing. So I'm going to give you an example that I might use if I were to do a before and after story for my character. Okay. So I was lonely and I was hooked on online dating sites. I realized I needed to address blockages in my root chakra and explore my styles of attachment. I discovered how creative psychospiritual approaches in therapy could help ground me in my body and make for more secure romantic relationships. And so now I'm in a healthy long-term partnership. I'm so happy and fulfilled. I just had to bring it into my therapeutic and healing work and share it with you and my clients. Okay, so that's like a before and after story. So again, fairly easy to write. So I was, then, now, right? Pretty basic. I was, then, now. All right, so that's before and after. Now let's talk about the amazing discovery. Amazing discovery. Okay, so here's an example of an amazing discovery story. Oh my gosh, you guys, wait until you hear about this amazing thing I discovered. You are not going to believe it. I wasn't sure it would work, but it's awesome. You have to try it. Okay. So as I said before, these stories are particularly useful. Like, let's say if you're selling a webinar or a short-term workshop in which you want your audience to believe that the answer that they've been searching for is finally available. This was the angle I took more or less with my webinar, 4 keys to making a shit ton of money and honoring your soul purpose. So I used kind of an amazing discovery angle to pitch that webinar to you guys. And then once I had you in the webinar, I used a loss and redemption story to illustrate how to do a loss and redemption story, but also to convince you that to come on the same path that I did, right? To come work with me through the Abundant Healer program, 90 Days to Skyrocket Your Career, because I really believe that you could have a similar kind of mental, emotional, and financial success that I've had. Okay, so that's amazing discovery. For another example of this might be like if you have a specialty or you have a particular kind of training. So for example, like Claudia, I think Claudia is watching this. Claudia is a grief counselor. That's specialization, right? I work with grief. I work with grievers, right? So that's a good one. So amazing, just like what did you discover as a grief counselor that's particularly effective for grieving? And that's great because you have a niche right there. It's not so broad that you're trying to appeal to everyone, right? Or let's say if you're a healer, like let's say you're really into sound healing or tuning forks as a way to clear your biofield, right? then that's a niche thing. That's like an amazing discovery. Like I was an energy healer and worker for years doing some, XYZ. And then I discovered tuning forks, and I've learned how to clear my biofield, and it cleared up my sinuses. And now my back doesn't hurt anymore. And I've got 3 case studies with clients who said that blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of like when you have a thing that you're pitching. For therapists, it could be like EMDR, right? Or which is eye movement desensitization, or other forms of like trauma treatment, for example. Amazing discovery. Like I sometimes use this when I talk about mindfulness and creative arts therapies. Specifically, I use the chakra system as a framework for that. So amazing discovery. Let's sum it up by saying, let's say specialization. Specialization, a special tool or technique. So if you feel like you've got a specialization, a tool, or some kind of technique that you use that's particularly effective, or that you think could be particularly marketable, then an amazing discovery angle might be a good one to match with your core identity. Now, the last one is pretty basic. It's third person testimonial. And this one's fairly simple, and actually this is probably one that most people are comfortable with initially if they've been working for a while. Basically, it's sharing other people's success with whatever it is that you're doing, right? So with your approach or your programs, basically what you're doing is you're providing social proof. That's what I'm going to write down. Social proof. Right, so third-person testimonial is essentially social proof. So this is where you get as many of your clients and or your students to sing your praises, right? And you could do that through multiple case studies, or you could do that through like standalone stories. Like you pick one narrative. I actually just, at that same conference, the Low Country Mental Health Conference, I saw Dr. Jeffrey Cutler give a presentation on the power of storytelling. And now he has a therapeutic clinic in Nepal. And the whole point of that clinic is to try to educate the community so that the girls in this particular area are not sold into sex slavery. And so what he does a lot of like fundraising and trying to make money in order to bring funds to that project that he's passionate about. And so he's really looked a lot at what are the angles that encourage people to spend money. And he looks specifically at storytelling. And storytelling is probably one of the best things to help sell whatever it is you want to sell. Even if it's supporting, a program like this in Nepal. So what he realized was he would tell stories, and stories were a lot more effective than statistics or like cold information, right? And so when he started telling stories, he saw an improved result. But then he started looking at if I tell a lot of stories or if I tell one story. And what do you think happened? He found that if he just focused in on one story, like one particularly poignant example, that he would actually get more buy-in, more funds than if he told multiple stories. Because that one story, you were able to make a deeper connection. So the reason I bring this up as being sort of like the foundation of your marketing plan, right, is I want you to come up with your one story, your about me story. What is your about me story? What core identity archetype best illustrates that? What story angle best illustrates that? Now, in addition to that, there are 4 story elements that help flesh this out. We talk about all of this a lot more in depth in my program, The Abundant Healer, 90 Days to Skyrocket Your Career. I am accepting 8 people into the current cycle. There are 6 spots left at this time. So if you are interested, I'm going to put a link in the comments of this video to either give me a call for a consultation if you want to find out more about the program, or you can also check out the enrollment page or the webinar that's pinned to the top of the thread on our wall in this group. So are there any questions based on what I've talked about so far before I sign off. I promised this would be a short segment. So, okay. All right. So that's our 30-minute segment on step 1 of building a marketing plan. If you're interested, you can draft some of your About Me stories. Start drafting an About Me story, post it in the feed, and I can give you some pointers and some content, comments in the days ahead. So I'm going to post this as a replay to the wall so everybody gets to see it as well. And I'm probably going to do another live video like this next week on a related topic. Thanks, Claudia. I'm glad you were able to come. I saw some likes in there. Thank you to everyone that was watching the live feed. You guys are amazing. And I'll try to keep posting some content that is relevant and that touches upon, you know, your purposes for joining the group. So have a great day, guys.